The reporting is that your candidate, Joe Biden, has grown more receptive over the last few days, hearing this negative information and maybe dropping out, and that we could actually see him withdraw. This is CBS reporting and others as early as this weekend. Where's the truth in that?
It's not true at all. Joe Biden has been very clear. He is running for president of the United States, and our campaign is continuing to implement a strategy to win with him at the top of the ticket.
It's not going to be Harris, Whitmer, or...
It is going to be Joe Biden, Kamala Harris.
And I want to be crystal clear. He's made a decision, and that decision is to accept the nomination and run for re-election, win re-election. And I think that there are those out there that need to hear it again, that he made a decision. He's going to be the candidate. He's going to be the next president.
President Biden has dropped out of the 2024 race.
In a move that perfectly encapsulates the Biden campaign's operating procedure, the co-chairs of the campaign were all saying this week and even into Sunday morning that the resident-in-chief would not be dropping out of the 2024 race. Then on Sunday afternoon, Joe Biden's team posted a letter to social media saying that he would be dropping out.
CBS News had a brief conversation with Frank Biden, one of President Biden's two younger brothers, and here's what he told us. He said, "I'm incredibly proud of my brother. Selfishly, I will have him back to enjoy whatever time we have left. He is a genuine hero. Country over self. It sounds corny in our cynical political environment, but he nor I are cynical. The goal remains the same: defeat Trump and continue the work that Joe has done. My hope is that our party rallies around this heroic act." We asked him whether he feels that his brother's overall health and vitality played a major role in this decision, and he says, in my humble opinion, absolutely.
Well, that is notable because to date, the family, the White House, the establishment has rejected the premise that there was anything that was challenging the president's mental acuity or his health, and that all these accusations were baseless, that it was just age and a few difficult nights like he had on the debate stage. So that is a change in message.
It appears the nomination will be handed to Kamala Harris, which will mean the party claiming to save democracy will be circumventing the primary process, creating a new standard for how much hypocrisy one political party can engage in.
She doesn't have a single pledged delegate yet, but Vice President Kamala Harris is quickly emerging as the presumptive Democratic nominee. Even before Harris made it official that she would be running to replace Biden at the top of the ticket, she had locked up key endorsements, starting with Biden himself and former President Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton. Members of Congress quickly endorsing too.
It's in the interest of continuity, stability, and unity for the Democratic Party to clearly coalesce around Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee.
Including key figures in the House, the political arm of the Congressional Black Caucus, and Jim Clyburn, widely seen as the most important endorsement Biden himself received 4 years ago. And more than a dozen senators, some of the party's top donors too, many of them who had cut off support for Biden, have quickly come out to endorse Harris. But again, Kamala Harris doesn't have a single pledged delegate yet. Shortly after Biden bowed out, DNC Chairman Jamie Harrison declared that the party's process for picking his successor, quote, will be governed by established rules and procedures. It's unclear if there will be any major challenge to Harris, but attention is already turning to who she could choose as a running mate. Some of them potential contenders, including Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, Roy Cooper, governor of North Carolina, Phil Murphy, governor of New Jersey, Andy Beshear, governor of Kentucky, governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, and Arizona Senator Mark Kelly. Also potentially on the list, Gretchen Whitmer from the battleground state of Michigan.
As I have said before, the number one question that should be asked of Democrats by so-called journalists is how Joe Biden can stay on as president but not be fit to run a presidential campaign. But as you know, the majority of the media are propagandists who will never even think to ask this question. As far as the Harris campaign, the media is going to try and spin her as a completely different animal and keep the distance between her and Biden. However, she was not only present for the administration's policy decisions, but she was also put in charge of multiple failed political narratives. This would be the equivalent of firing a coach for terrible results and then hiring the assistant coach who ran the worst offense in the league, contributing to those terrible results.
Do you ban plastic straws?
I think we should. Yes.
But would you support changing the dietary guidelines?
Yes.
The food pyramid, what people
yes.
to reduce red meat specifically?
Yes, I would.
People who are in convicted in prison, like the Boston Marathon bomber, on death row, people who are convicted of sexual assault, they should be able to vote?
I think we should have that conversation. It is our lowest income communities and our communities of color that are most impacted by these extreme conditions and impacted by issues that are not of their own making. And so women. Absolutely. And so we have to address this in a way that is about giving resources based on equity, understanding that we fight for equality, but we also need to fight for equity, understanding not everyone starts out at the same place. And if we want people to be in an equal place, sometimes we have to take into account those disparities and do that work.
What is the solution for voters who have jobs and interests in the fossil fuel industry?
Well, for the workers in that industry, we have to, we have to encourage that those industries do better in terms of giving the workers an ability to transition into the jobs of the future, such as renewable energy.
A lot of the signs at the rally you just held were people standing there saying, abolish ICE.
Yeah.
Is that a position that you agree with?
Listen, I think there's no question that we've got to critically re-examine ICE and its role and the way that it is being administered and the work it is doing, and we need to probably think about starting from scratch. I am in favor of saying that we're not going to treat people who are undocumented across the border as criminals. That's correct. That is correct. So again, back to the United States Congress, here's my point. If they fail to act as President of the United States, I am prepared to get rid of the filibuster, to pass a Green New Deal. There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. Let's talk about America's failure when it comes to understanding how you create safe communities. And by that I mean this. It is outdated, it is wrong-headed thinking to think that the only way you're going to get communities to be safe is to put more police officers on the street. What we have to do, and what we will do, is reimagine public safety.
Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana.
We have incarcerated so many, in particular young men and young men of color, in a way that we have not for the same level of use other young men. We are also changing, y'all might have heard that this week, the federal government's approach to marijuana. Because the bottom line there is nobody should have to go to jail for smoking weed.
Harris oversaw roughly 1,900 marijuana convictions in San Francisco during her time as the city's district attorney, 6% more than her predecessor.
Vice President Harris locked up nearly 2,000 people for marijuana-related offenses while she was California's attorney general.
Have you ever smoked?
I have.
Okay. Like
And I inhale. I did inhale.
Okay.
She blocked evidence. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place. That impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
It's also rather ironic that Kamala Harris, who is the first DEI vice presidential pick, being selected based on her race and gender, will now be handed the nomination based on the same factors. If the party was actually concerned with selecting the best nominee possible, they wouldn't choose someone who has poll numbers like this.
Vice President Kamala Harris received the worst rating in the history of that NBC poll.
Overall, this definitely changes the race significantly when you consider that while Harris is certainly an idiot, she is not a senile old man who can barely make it up a flight of stairs. Having Harris at the top of the ticket also makes it more plausible should they attempt to run a repeat of the most free and fair election in U.S. history in 2020. With Biden, most people would have never bought that he actually won, and that narrative now is not a problem. My line of thinking of the last couple of years has been there is no way the powers that be in Washington are going to let Donald Trump win an election leading to his return to the White House. They impeached him during his presidency, they used lawfare to try and put him in prison, which is not over yet, and most recently he was shot. In the last week, the Republican nominee was shot and the Democrats nominee was forced out of the race, so I think it is safe to say that it's going to be a wild ride leading up to the election. As I showed you earlier in the video, Harris supports policies that are even worse than Biden in many areas, but aside from the policies, she is just not a smart person. In honor of her going from the dumbest vice president in history to potentially the dumbest major party nominee in history, here are some of the greatest hits.
Introduce the Vice President, Kamala Harris.
I am Kamala Harris. My pronouns are she and her. I am a woman sitting at the table wearing a blue suit.
Do you have any plans to visit the border?
At some point, we are going to the border. We've been to the border. So this whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. And I don't understand the point that you're making.
Ukraine is a country in Europe. It exists next to another country called Russia. Russia is a bigger country. Russia is a powerful country. Russia decided to invade a smaller country called Ukraine. So basically, that's wrong.
And thank you, guys. And my pronouns are she, her, and hers.
She, her, and her. Mine too.
Work of community work, and in particular violence intervention, is about investing in the community, understanding our capacity, understanding the greatness, and then being motivated with that knowledge to do what we can to reduce harm, but not for the sake only of reducing harm, but in investing in the potential and the greatness. That is the essence of this work. And it is a false choice to suggest that you're either in favor of the Second Amendment or you want to take everyone's guns away. I'm in favor of the Second Amendment, and we need an assault weapons ban. I support the Second Amendment, and we need universal background checks. I support the Second Amendment, and we need red flag laws. And I again want to thank the Secretary for your work. This issue of transportation is fundamentally about just making sure that people have the ability to get where they need to go. It's that basic. And I think the first part of this issue that should be articulated is AI is kind of a fancy thing. It's, first of all, it's 2 letters. It means artificial intelligence. But ultimately what it is it's about machine learning. And so the machine is taught. And part of the issue here is what information is going into the machine that will then determine, and we can predict then, if we think about what information is going in, what then will be produced in terms of decisions and opinions that may be made through that process. Round and round. Here's the thing. We were all born knowing that there's nothing we can take for granted.
What?
When you're a role model, people watch what you do to see if it matches what you say. And increasing the use and development of apps. On that last point, I'd ask you to just imagine your own smartphone and the apps that it contains, and what those apps then give you in terms of access to a myriad of information. The idea of exploring the unknown and systems that help you go about your daily life. Everything is in context. My mother she would give us a hard time sometimes, and she would say to us, I don't know what's wrong with you young people. You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you. You know, so many of us have come from movements that were about the fight for equality. We also understand there's a difference between equality and equity. Equity is everyone deserves to have, right, and be treated equal. But equity understands that not everybody starts out on the same base.
So if you're giving everybody an equal amount, but they're starting out on different bases, are they really going to have the opportunity to compete and achieve? That's why we purposefully, as an administration, the president, myself, the secretary, and everyone in our administration are so dedicated to a specific principle, which is that of equity.
The nature of democracy there are two sides to it in terms of the nature of it. There's a duality. On the one hand, when democracy is intact, it is incredibly strong in terms of the strength it bestows on the individuals in terms of their rights and their freedoms. Incredibly strong in terms of what it does for its people. On the other hand, it's very fragile. Our democracy will only be as intact as our willingness to fight for it. And so fight we must and fight we will.
You know, I think so much about, I talk about, we talk about the arc. I think about it as also like a relay race, and those who carried the baton and were measured by what they did when they had it, and then they passed it to us.
Yeah. Well,
and the point will be, what do we do while we're carrying the baton?
Before we pass
it. Understanding that the race will never be over. But the question is, what do you do in the time when you're carrying the baton?
That's exactly
right.
I mean, honestly, it's like kindergarten.
This is that community who understands and can see what is possible unburdened by what has been.
You must have and know that you are applauded for having the ability to see what can be unburdened by what has been.
What can be unburdened by what has been.
Always believe in what can be unburdened by what has been.
What can be unburdened by what has been.
That can be unburdened by what has been.
What can be unburdened by what has been.
Seeing what is possible unburdened by what has been.
What can be unburdened by what has been.
What can be unburdened by what has been.
Where we can be unburdened by where we have been.
What can be unburdened by what has been.
Unburdened by what has been.
What could be unburdened by what had been.
What can be unburdened by what has been.
What could be unburdened by what had been.
I got some words. I got the vocabulary.
I gave her the benefit of the doubt. I did not think she was an idiot. I now think she's a moron. She's not that smart. Forgive me. I'm still one of those people who gets wooed by titles. I'm like, she was the Attorney General of the state of California. How dumb could she be? Like, dumb. The answer is very, very dumb is the answer.